Hi all. We'll get started in just a moment. We're waiting for a few more people to be able to hop on and make sure speakers are on and ready as well. Thank you.
Hey, good evening. How are you all?
Doing well, thank you.
I'm Councilmember Edward Pollard. I appreciate the invitation for the panel this evening.
Thank you for joining us. All right, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining our first town hall event. This event is brought together from the Houston African Alliance Network. It's an initiative in Houston of African organizations to come together and present opportunities for us to greater impact the community together as a whole. So thank you for joining. This is our first town hall event, and it is in light of recent events and the current protests that are happening, and trying to sift through and educate ourselves and our members on how we progress from protest to policy and enacting those, implementing policies that can enact change for more permanent in our community. So thank you for this opportunity. Thank you for all our panelists for joining us. This event, we scheduled it specifically for a kickoff event for Juneteenth. Juneteenth is a national holiday in Texas. It's recognized in Texas. It is the day that slaves were finally, 2.5 years later, were finally given the news that they were free of the Emancipation Proclamation. This was 155 years ago, 1865, June 19th, 1865. So if we fast forward to 155 years later, we are now on our 23rd day of protest against anti-racism and police brutality. In the wake of the loss of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery, we are at a place where we are tired and we want to fight, but we also want to make sure we are collecting in an organized way that will affect that permanent change that we're looking for. So thank you for being a part of this and wanting to learn more. So this is our agenda as we get started. We have our introduction and an introduction of our speakers. Joining us today, we have Councilmember Edward Pollard, Attorney Alvin Ajay, Attorney Nneka Akubeze, Councilmember Tiffany Thomas, Attorney Stacey Allen, and the National Urban League President, Ray Shackelford. Once we introduce our speakers, we will then go into guided questions that we presented for about an hour. And following the guided questions, we'll then allow the forum to be opened up to members on the call. And from there, we'll then have our closing remarks for about 15 minutes from the speakers as well as the moderators. So I will be moderating along with Edidiong Obot, and she will be co-moderating with me. Hi, Edidiong.
Hey, y'all.
The norms for this is to please remain on mute unless you are a moderator or a speaker, or once we get to the open forum when you are called on. So we'll take questions from the chat, as well as if you use the raise your hand, we'll call on you and then you are free to unmute yourself to speak. But the first hour is the guided questions, and it's expected for our panelist members to share first. Thank you. So our first panelist is Councilmember Edward Pollard, and he represents District J. Councilmember Edward Pollard, please feel free to introduce yourself.
Good evening. My name is Edward Pollard, and I want to thank you all for having me join you all for the Protest to Policy Town Hall. I'm recently elected. I represent District J on City Council. District J is Southwest Houston, Gulfton, Sharpstown, Brayburn, Alief, and Westwood. I grew up right here in Houston, Texas, a proud product of Southwest Houston. I went to all HISD schools, then went off to Morehouse College, received my degree in political science, came back to Houston, went to Thurgood Marshall School of Law, and received my law degree in 2012, and I own my own law practice in District J. I'm also the founder of Suits for Success, which is a nonprofit program that mentors teen boys on life skills at HISD schools, and at the end of the program, we give them a free suit, shirt, and tie for graduation. I look forward to hearing your questions and answering your questions this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Attorney Alvin Ajay. Welcome to introduce yourself as well, please.
Hello, everyone. My name is Alvin Ajay, and I am a Houston native. I went and graduated at Langham Creek High School. That's in the Cypher RC district. And then I went to Notre Dame for undergrad, and then I went to Notre Dame for law school. And then after being in the Arctic tundra for 7 years, decided I needed to come back to warm Houston, Texas. And when I came back, I worked at the Harris County District Attorney's Office, had the opportunity to hone my trial skills, advocating for people who had been victims in assault family member cases and people who were primarily involved in DWI cases. After my tenure there, I left and I worked at Abraham Watkins, which is the oldest plaintiff's firm in Texas. And then about 2 years ago, me and my fellow classmate, we opened up our own firm. We have an office in downtown Houston, and then we have one that's going to be opening up off of Westheimer and Derry Ashford. We do primarily personal injury and criminal defense. And I am the president-elect for the Houston Young Lawyers Association, and I'm finishing up my tenure as president for the Young Professionals for Covenant House, and that's an organization that focuses on youth homelessness. And so most of the residents there are Black and brown that are that have aged out of the foster system. And so the whole point of that organization is to help get young people from homelessness to being independent.
Awesome. Thank you. Next, we have attorney Nneka Akubeze.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for the invitation. Yeah, my name is Nneka Akubeze. I was actually born and raised in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, so a little further and colder than here, but I'm certainly enjoying the weather and the welcome in this beautiful city. I moved here for law school, specifically Thurgood Marshall School of Law, where I graduated and now run my own criminal defense and immigration practice, as well as handling family law. Before law school and throughout, I spent 15 years as a full-time organizer, training unions, students, Dreamer movement, you name it, from coast to coast across the country, and still do that work as a part of the Leading Change Network to this day. I'm also a founding member of the Houston Protesters Defense Team, which was established in response to the overwhelming amount of arrests happening with the protests in Houston. And we collectively represented nearly 100 protesters for free and participated in the work to get District Attorney Ogg to drop more than 600 charges. I'm excited to be here this evening and looking forward to the dialogue. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And we have Council Member Tiffany Thomas from District F.
Good evening. We're gonna have to update my photos because I don't even look like that anymore, but it's all good. So good evening, everyone. I am appreciative of the opportunity to join with you today. I'm shocked that we have African brothers and sisters that are not from A-Leaf. Like when you said Cypress and Milwaukee, I was like, no, because if you're in Houston and you are of the African diaspora, I think you come from A-Leaf. That's just my thought. You gotta be from A-Leaf, like somebody, you know. But so I represent District F. I was elected along with Edward in December after our runoffs. He attended HISD, I attended A-Leaf ISD schools. Proud graduate of A-Leaf LSIC. I still reside in A-Leaf. I served on the, in 2013, I was elected to the A-Leaf ISD board, 2013 to 2017. I served one term, didn't run for re-election, and my community asked me to represent them at City Hall. And then that journey began. I am much more comfortable in the streets. I came up in, community-based organization type of work, registering voters, organizing people, issue campaigns. So definitely I'm excited to have this conversation where we get to talk about both, from protest to policy, and then hopefully we can talk about the systems we operate in. Thank you.
Thank you. And we have Attorney Stacey M. Allen.
Hello and good evening. It's such a pleasure to be here with all of you. I'm honored to be on this panel with so many esteemed lawyers and civil activists and representatives of this great city. Again, my name is Stacey Allen. I was born in Panama, immigrated here with my family, and grew up basically here in Houston after that. Proud graduate of Klein Forest High School, the Real Eagles. Let me not start a fight. And then when I received my undergraduate degree in international relations from St. Edward's University, and went on to receive my law degree from Howard University School of Law in Washington, D.C. Came back to Houston, practiced a number of places, and then started my own firm back in 2011. My practice consists mostly of criminal defense work, civil litigation, some wills and probate matters, as well as some family law. In my time during St. Edward's University, I really cultivated my interest in social justice issues, was even trained through Oxfam America and other organizations to do lobbying work, specifically around trade issues. And that commitment to social justice also was the reason why I went to Howard, where you were taught you were either an attorney is either a parasite on society or a social engineer. And so I am here and happy to be thinking about how we all can be social engineers, be crafting what our society should look like, and actively engage our communities from the streets to the courtrooms, to the legislature, to City Hall. And so again, thank you for this opportunity, and I look forward to the dialogue.
And our last speakers, the president from the National Urban League of Young Professionals Association, Ray Shackelford. Ray is running a little late, so he might not be on yet. So when he does enter, we'll allow him to introduce himself then. Thank you. I also wanted to introduce my co-moderator, Edidiong Obot. Edidiong, you're on mute.
Sorry, y'all. Hi, everybody. My name is Edidiong E.CHRYS Obot. I currently serve as the Deputy Speaker for Proper Young Professionals. I'm also a cultural influencer and a strategist. And today we're just here to make sure that we know what the next steps are. So feel free to ask your questions, whether you're raising your hand or you're dropping it in the chat. This town hall is for everybody.
Thank you. All right, and my name is Sierra Cunningham. I am with the Professional Association of Young Africans. I'm the Chief Membership Officer for our organization, and I'm grateful to be a part of this dialogue and this opportunity. So we can go ahead and get started and into our questions. So our first set of questions is surrounded around understanding policy and its restrictions. So our first question is, how do we move from requests and ideas to implementing policies against police brutality and racism within the system? So how do we move from those ideas to actually implementing the policies? And this question is directed for Councilmember Pollard,
Okay.
Thomas, and then Attorney Ajay and Allen.
Great question. I think the first thing you have to understand is who represents you and what the issue is pertaining to. If it's a local issue, a state issue, or a federal issue. And sometimes it could be something related to HISD. And you have representatives that represent you on all these different levels. And so if you don't know who represents you, you need to go on Google. You could type in who represents you, and it would allow you to put in your address. And once you put in your address, it's going to give you all the people who actually represent you. And that's important to know, because if you don't know who represents you, you don't know if they share your common interests. And a lot of people, if I give them a quiz right now and say, you know, who's your state representative or who's your A-Leaf ISD board member, you may not know. And if you don't know, then you're already behind the 8 ball. So that's the first thing. Know who your representative is, then identify where your issue should go towards. So if it's, let's say, body cam footage, right? That's going to be a local issue, and you'll come to your city council member, and that'll be something that we could try to advocate on your behalf with the mayor's administration and the chief of police for the Houston Police Department to see what policies we can put in place for more transparency and accountability when it comes to body cams. So know who your representative is, and then identify which issue is at that level, and then go speak to them directly.
Would you mind repeating the question for me?
How do we move from requests and ideas to implementing policies against police brutality and racism within the systems?
Sure. So regardless of what it is, HPD, police brutality, whatever the issue is, because there's multiple things we can do at once, you have to be committed to that. So a lot of what we experienced in the Brother Floyd's passing away, especially as he was a Houston native, was that there was a global upset, right? And so there's global upset, and there's this national narrative about defunding the police, but there was not much local commitment to the process of understanding how the system even works. So so then you're making requests against the system that the square and the peg and it doesn't fit, right? And we have to be committed to deconstructing these systems that we claim oppress us, and they do. So especially when these systems have been in place for centuries, it doesn't happen in 20 days. It doesn't happen in 10 days. And so we have to be committed to the process of doing the hard work. And so why do I say that is because the budget and, you know, the Chronicle and all the news outlets were talking about what council and the mayor did not do, which was actually inaccurate. It wasn't true. So it wasn't true at all. And my colleague can attest to that. So the budget process for the city started 60 days out. Everything's public, everything's broadcast live, it's replayed, the agenda's there, you can see the budget. The budget for HPD was on April 7th. How many comments do we have? Do y'all know? 4. And it's the same 4 people who show up all the time. You see what I'm saying? So the day before the vote, then it's 300. Then it's the claim that we're not listening. That's inaccurate. We've been doing this work hours after hours after hours of understanding the system. And I'll tell you, it is imperative for people like you, everyday people, to make this a priority. It is easy to say, because when I will push back on people, like, well, where you was at on April 7th, right? You got all this criticism, but you wasn't at the meeting. You didn't send an email. You didn't make a phone call. So all of a sudden now, because quietly, many of the Black council members were doing that work on behalf of the city before George Floyd even passed away. And we drafted a letter articulating that. So we still, just because we're elected, our Blackness is not separated from us. Just because we've ascended to this seat, we still experience the same heartache and the same issues and the same type of heaviness. So if we're going to deconstruct systems of oppression, we must first understand how the system operates. And it alludes to my colleagues' comments about understanding who represents you. People will call city council and talk about what's happening at HISD. Can't help you. Like, they don't talk. I mean, those are 2 different jurisdictions. Or we don't understand the connection between the federal legislation, the state, the county, and the city. And those are separate jurisdictions. So, all the organizations we're in and all of the work that we do, we have to be really strategic. And strategic is that in your organization, you should have somebody who's assigned to watching commissioner's court. You should have somebody assigned to watching city council meetings. You should have somebody assigned, right? So then when you get to the body, everyone's reporting out and they become a master in this language. So by the time you have a complaint, you're so ahead of the system, y'all can organize and plan and help challenge us if we're not tracking with you. Or you can help inform us of what your issues, because believe it or not, the earlier you start out, the better you allow us to implement your feedback into the policy. Well, there's nothing we can do within 5 days. There's nothing we can do. So we have to get serious about moving beyond the moment and being committed to the work, right? Because we're conditioned to, in 6 weeks, something else will happen, and then that's where we're at. And then we forgot about the work. So if we're gonna do that, we have to be completely committed to really working through this and getting beyond our upset and really thinking about what's our end goal and how do we want to make that happen. I'm done. I don't have nothing.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to make sure we keep us on the question, but I think something to think about too, because you brought up, strong points that we have to get serious about the movement. We need to have people at the council meetings. And so there was only 4 comments. I think something to think about, even though that information is public, it's not necessarily transparent and accessible to everyone.
So you get to see the same thing we see. And so it's all on the website. It's all on the internet. The meetings are live. And so we have to be careful not to spin ourselves into that when I push back on people like, well, you could go watch it because it replays. It's on channel 16. It's on Facebook Live. It's on Teams. It's there. It's posted, right? And so if we are, and again, I feel more comfortable sitting in y'all's seats, because I've done the community work, but we have to take responsibility for how we're not showing up for learning this information, right? We have to be accountable, like, well, I ain't been watching, I don't know what's happening. I don't know about that agenda item. I don't know, right? And so, and the thing about it is until we acknowledge that, we can't move beyond to how do we need to adjust? So it's posted by law. I have a housing committee meeting on Monday. That agenda is already posted. It's already live. I'll tell you who's going to be, we're talking about Harvey funds. We're talking about the rental assistance fund, that $15 million, that report, and we're talking about the housing authority. That's public information. You can sign up to comment, you can do all of that. But as an institution, as a city, and even as a department, we don't do a good job of communicating out. That is very clear, right? We're an aged old system. And that was some of the things that in our reforms that we offered, some of the immediate things that we agreed to was that we need public facing documents. We need to, be able to see some information. But the other part of it is we provide it, but you got to take advantage of it, right? It's on the internet. We Google everything else, but we don't Google council meetings. We don't Google that, right? Until it's time. So all of that's public. And so we have to it's a two-way. We have to do a really good job of saying, hey, y'all, sign up for comments. Hey, y'all, pay attention to this committee. And my committee, I know we do that well. And my colleague is vice chair of budget and finance, and he's chaired most of those budget meetings. And so not too many, it's typically the same folks that are there. So when we talk about transparency, we have to put a definition on that. What does that mean? Is it posted? Because it's posted. Is it, the same stuff you get to see, we see. It's the same information. But again, that makes us better once we understand the system on how we can make sure that people access that, right? Like, why are they not even paying attention to it? We got to work through that.
And I think it's also, it goes back to knowing who your representative is. And I think we have to, we always say go out and vote, but it's only important if someone who's in the seat that actually represents you, and representation matters. And this is the first time that we've had 6 Black council members on council, and we have some young Black council members. And I think we can find ways as well to reach our peers and our demographic through, social media and email blasts and doing more town halls like this. So I think it's a collaborative effort between us and you all to find ways to get that information out. And I'm on every single social media platform, and I put a lot of information out there on it. And so please follow me. And I usually do this at the end, but my district email is districtj@houstontx.gov. And you can always reach out with an email with any issues or concerns or any questions that you may have, and we'll keep you in the loop.
Thank you. And I think, like you said, it goes back to institutions though. Like for me, I'm an educator. I teach high school students. Where are we educating our students about this? We just graduate and then all of a sudden we have knowledge. Oh, I'm supposed to go to, post and check Facebook for counsel. So I think, it's important to put it on individuals, but we have to acknowledge the institutions that are not short in supporting us.
Very old. They're like old institutions, and it's the way I experience it is that it's siloed, right? Like, why no one knows this, right? And it's even a challenge, even as a council member, sometimes to get information. You'd be surprised how much fighting. I'm like, what? So nobody knows the answer, right? And I'm elected to the seat. So I imagine if someone who's not is attempting to, investigate on their own, and that's the type of transparent work that we're trying to offer to our community, so we can be empowered and we can deconstruct it and create something else that works for us.
And then I'd like to let Attorney Allen speak, and then Attorney Akubeze, I saw your hand raised, so if you want to speak after Attorney Allen, that'll work as well.
Just a quick word on this topic. I think one critical component of it, some of which you touched on, just to add a little bit to what has already been said, is essentially demystifying the process and where the power lies. So when we're talking about power to the people, we have to help empower people to be the power and be the solution. And some of the systems are set up in a way so that people aren't as educated and access it as readily. So you can post something, but if I don't know that I need to look there to see it, or that this is the place where this particular avenue can be addressed, then you can put it anywhere. You can put it on a billboard, but if I don't understand what that means in reality for my life and the issues that I concern myself with, then it's of no avail. So I think what was being alluded to was just kind of demystifying the processes and the places that hold the power that people are trying to take back and have their voices added to. The second part that I wanted to touch on was the fact that there's a lot of organizations doing good work. And the reason why protests are so effective is because of large numbers, right? So a lot of people showing up at the same time, focused on the same issue, magnifies the issue. And similarly, if organizations, so for instance, I'm on the board of the Houston Lawyers Association, the Black Bar Association for the Houston metro area. If we get together with the Urban League and the NAACP and so many other organizations, even some that some of our fellow panelists may mention here, talk about and come up with kind of an agenda in this moment, things that we've learned, start to denote exactly, okay, where, if we want to change the policy on use of force, where is that in? Okay, part of it is in the police handbook. Okay, we want the change and the police aren't willing to do it. Can city council interject? All of those types of things, and really map out a process. We can lift the burden, if you will, together and do it in a way that allows that if this one person has to step away in this organization or wherever, that because there's multiple organizations working on it, then we can continue the long-term work, because there are things that can be done immediately, but whether or not the people in power are going to be willing to listen to those demands is another question.
Sure.
So we have to be willing to stay with it.
Sure.
And being in a coalition beyond the individual organizations and say, hey, this is the agenda we're putting together as a large coalition.
Yep.
We're going to bring our entire membership, our listserv, all of our social media, and we're not giving up. So we didn't get the demands we wanted in this budget, but best believe by next budget,
Sure.
we're going to be talking about shifting funds from the police to other types of people who might show up to a place where a Tatiana Jefferson wants a welfare check for her,
Yeah.
and instead of police officers showing up, we
Sure.
have unarmed mental health specialists, so that something that simple doesn't escalate. So coalition building to me is fundamental, and hopefully some of the stuff that we can do collectively here as panel and beyond.
Yep, absolutely.
For our next question, this is for Councilman Pollard, about how long does it take to go from an idea to a policy? If you can explain that for everyone.
So sometimes it could take like a day. It just depends on what it is. Sometimes it's going to take. All right, I'll give you two examples. So we just got out of the. We're doing some police reform at City Hall right now, and there was this campaign called 8 Can't Wait that was a national push for certain reforms within police departments, like no chokeholds, duty to intervene, a notice before you shoot. They had 8 things, and those 8 things weren't tied to money at all. I mean, you can just say this is what we're gonna do. This is gonna be the new policy, and the mayor was able to do that overnight. Now you have to be the mayor to do that, right? But I couldn't do it just as your city council member, but I can push the mayor to do it, and collectively council members did do that.
You did, right?
And then he did sign that, and it became policy right then and there.
Yeah.
There was another policy that I'm working on, which is going to be an online portal for police misconduct. So civilians can go on, they can go and file a complaint against a police officer, and it will track all the data of that complaint, and it'll be open and accessible for the public to see which officers are getting complaints, where they are, what was the nature of the complaint, and all the data surrounding it. Well, for something like that, I was told it's probably going to take about 9 weeks to build out that platform. But it's something that can happen and will happen. So some things can take a day, some things will take a few months. It just depends on the nature of the reform. But it's my intention that whatever we can get done now, we need to just push now.
Yeah.
And then as time goes along, continue to push for more and more, but we shouldn't wait. Whatever we can do now, we have to do now.
This is the time to do it, right? And then the dashboard he's talking about, like, so, you know, for instance, the type of information you will want to see. So let's say you just want to look in your zip code, and you should be able to, let's say you experience an officer. So for instance, I was stopped the night of my campaign candidates forum. I was stopped by HPD. I had campaign signs in the back. I had all of that, hearts racing. It's right across the street from West Side Police. So he didn't give me his name. He didn't give me any of that light, flashlight in my face. I'm like, okay, my phone's dead. It's about to go down. If I say something and it escalates, they're going to say I had an attitude. Right? So, okay, let me just, whatever. I didn't know this man's name. But let's say on that dashboard, I can go look at his name. I should be able to track how many complaints, similar complaints were made against him. And in addition to that, how many of his peers have made complaints. So there's a fun fact about HPD that I didn't know until we met with them, is that there's a 3-to-1 complaint. So the 2 million interactions with Houstonians, there are around 265 complaints from civilians. But there were over 800 complaints about police from police, right? Didn't know that. So that dashboard should be able to tell us a story about some things. Also with that dashboard, what we intend for that to do is it's based on the data. Once we upload it and it starts pollinating by algorithm, it should inform us of particular trainings our department has to have, right? So we can't compare us to every city because we're not, you know, the way we recruit, all of that's different. And so we'll start being able to then say, well, based on what this data that's happening, we can now curate training specifically for our force. So if you have thoughts about what you want a public facing dashboard to look like, send that to us. So we can make sure that that's filtered and it's included so it can be as robust and as clean as possible. So anyone, no matter what their education level is, that they can look at that information and then it'll tell the story about who's actually supposed to protect and serve in your neighborhood.
And I think another thing to add to that is what we want to do is tie in the complaints to like disciplinary action. So
Correct.
If it shows that Officer Joe has 3 complaints over the past month, well, there needs to be some disciplinary action tied to that, whether there's additional training, there's unpaid time off or termination, something. And so it helps us keep everything real transparent to say, okay, there's no reason for Officer Joe to be on the force if he has all these complaints. And so it really it highlights them and lets them know that they're being watched at all times.
Yeah.
Okay. We're talking about policy.
Oh, she went on mute.
Edidiong, you want to unmute again?
All right. Can y'all hear me now? Yes. Okay. So Councilmember Thomas, you talked about us in general, not really knowing what the real process is of policy making. So my question to you is, what is the biggest misconception when it comes to policy implementation? I know Councilmember Power just kind of talked about the time frame, but in general, what is some of those misconceptions that you've seen or encountered from citizens when it comes to policy implementation?
Sure. I think one thing is levels of government. People confuse levels of government, but I think secondly, understanding, and just because I'm on city council, I'll just speak to that. The space that I have, we're in a strong mayor form of government, right? So, you know, the agenda that's posted every week, we don't set that agenda, like in layman's terms. So the document that we vote on and all those items, we don't set those agendas. The way that it works is that at the committee level, those where those items potentially come up for discussion, and that's how you're typically made aware, but I don't set that agenda. I don't, you know, we don't contribute to that conversation. That's based on the mayor. So that's why council, you know, had to push the mayor to do some things within his power immediately. So people think, oh, you're on city council, you can just X, Y, and Z. No, not at all. We literally have like a matchbox of space. and you got to think about how you move within that matchbox. The system is designed for us to be, to collaborate in numbers. So, you know, you need a certain number of votes to move anything, just based on the city charter. And so who's sitting up reading the city charter? Nobody, right? Like, who's doing that? So the misconception that I get a lot is that they think within our fingers we should be able to authorize X, Y, and Z, and that is totally not true. That's not how the city of Houston's chartered.
Okay, thank you for that. And so the reason why we're asking this again, because this town hall is called Protest to Policy. So it's key that we understand what that process looks like first, so that we have a better idea of how to move forward. So my next question, I'm going to pose this to Attorney Ajay. How much does economic wealth influence the success of policies being implemented? Unmute yourself so we can hear you. All right.
I guess just to get a better understanding of your question, like, do you mean as far as like enforcing with people who are in the criminal justice system, or are you talking about like council members who are trying to implement new laws? I guess, what do you?
So, I mean, you can talk from both, whichever way that you have experience with. You can talk from both.
I mean, so I'll say that as both being from a prosecutor and being a criminal defense attorney, your economic status is going to affect the outcome of how you were treated in the justice system, and that's just a reality. I think everyone here is committed to the idea that we are going to be a society where everyone is treated fairly, humanely, no matter what their economic background is. And so for a long time, we had a bail system that really punished people who were poor. And with this new bill, with this new movement, I think in the bail reform, where more people are getting what are called PR bonds, so a personal bond, where then they're not having to basically being stuck in jail for a minor, misdemeanor that the prosecutor eventually figures out is probably a trash case, and that person just isn't languishing in jail for that type of, for a low-level offense, like whether that's marijuana or a small level of a controlled substance. So there's been a movement, on that end. But if you have more funds, then you're typically going to get if you're charged with an offense, you're going to get an attorney. That attorney will less likely be overloaded. They'll probably be more aggressive, or at least more persistent with that prosecutor. And so that prosecutor, just from our perspective, like, prosecutors are typically overloaded. And so it's kind of like that, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. So if there's someone that's constantly going and following up, hey, what's going on with this case? Hey, what's going on with this case? It's going to get that prosecutor's attention. And so we have to make sure that we don't have, a debt in empathy, and making sure that we are encouraging everyone to give all the attention I think that we need. But so there has been some progress in that field, I think, in this time period that we're in right now. But I think we have to continue to keep it up. I mean, clearly, like, our council members have said, like, they've been working on some of these issues for a long time. And there's this quote by Abraham Lincoln that says that when you have the public sentiment, when you have the people on your side, nothing can fail. And this is a really rare opportunity where you have now a majority of Americans who finally get what I think people started with Black Lives Matter. And you have people's attention. And obviously, that there are federal issues, and there are state issues, and then there are local issues. But this is the time now, while we have people's attention, to push forward in making sure that the things that I think that a lot of the council members who have been in power now and have been working towards, can do it. Because if you're in a position of power right now, and that there are people who are calling, even if a lot of those calls are at times, I think, misguided because there's an ignorance as far as in the system, the pressure is there, and something has to get done. And if you keep up the pressure, something's going to get done. More people are going to get educated about it. More people are going to learn about the issue. More people are going to push and just say, because there comes a time when it just says enough is enough, and people are fed up, and something will happen. And if we keep doing things like this, where we're getting educated about the system, where we keep here learning about how we can be an influence, how we can be a partner with the people who are in power, the council members who are in there now, then we can make, I think, some really lasting changes. And so I think for a lot of people who are in positions of power, there are moments like, you can have the great idea, you can have the great platform, but if you don't have the public sentiment yet, then a lot of time it languishes. And right now the public sentiment, I think, is finally catching up to where a lot of people have been planning and been hoping to do. So I think that the events like this are great. I think we need to keep doing it. Obviously that there was a budget, there's a budget that's going to be coming in. So for the stuff where it's going to have to be a program, and I know I'm going back to the question that was asked before, but I think for stuff where money is being linked, then that's going to be stuff that's going to have to be done in the budget process, and that's going to take longer and more work and more effort. And I think the stuff where like the mayor was able to execute, as far as like having no chokeholds, there's public sentiment, I think, that was behind it with that. You had council members who were pushing for that, and you had the police unions who were at least soft or not being, super opposed. So it was able to get done rather quickly. But I think that's something that we just have to continue to push and going forward. But as far as like with wealth, yes, I mean, I definitely see the disparity. I saw it as a prosecutor, and you want to always keep, I think as a prosecutor, you always want to keep in mind your own life experience, and then the fact that other people have life experiences that are different from yours. And how can you make sure that you're treating that person as fairly and as humanely as possible? And then obviously vice versa, if you're a defense attorney, you're always trying to push your client's case as hard as possible, no matter what their background is. So.
Okay. Thank you for that. And so I know that there have been a lot of questions in the chat, and we're also getting questions as well. So if you have them, keep coming with their questions. So when we do get to the portion of question and answer, we'll be able to answer that. But I do want to switch gears a little bit, just because I know that this is probably a hot button topic anyway. So my question is going to go in regards to the protest to policy. While obviously we're seeing a lot of the police brutality, the social injustice, and et cetera. And this question is going to be posed to everybody. So the first question that I have in regards to that, and I think maybe more so the council members may be able to speak more to this, but what exactly is the executive order on excessive force? I know that there was a big push from council for the mayor to sign that into an executive order, and explain to us, what does that mean for us citizens moving forward?
So an executive order is authority by the mayor to be able to put together a document of reforms that he can sign into policy right then and there. And our most current executive order, most of it dealt with the 8 can't wait issues that we discussed before, as well as some policy and reforms around no-knock warrants, because that was a big discussion as well. And so in executive order, the mayor has, just like the president can sign executive orders on the federal level. It's the ability to bypass either Congress or council to put something into place immediately. And usually those things are not tied to money. They're strictly reform, in which you're either updating or revising a current policy to make that the newest updated policy.
Right. And if I can add to that, so there was when the mayor announced that he would roll these out, then there was an article like, oh, well, we already do that, right? So it's been HPD's practice not to do it. It's never been their policy. So we have to understand, just because they don't train on it does not mean the occurrences don't happen. I'm sure there's some folks in Houston that says they've been in a chokehold by HPD, right? So I'm sure we can say that. So with that executive order, it immediately changes their handbook, and then the accountability is based on that. So it's been, for the last 40 years, they have not trained or practiced chokehold. They have not trained on those measures, but there's never been anything in the books indefinitely. And so that's what we're rolling in immediately, right? Because some things are in stages. And so we knew that those were items that the mayor could adopt immediately, and HPD's in the process of updating that. And they're also, we sent over a list of a very exhaustive list of reforms that came from community members, public letters. We compiled all of that. And so HPD is currently right now auditing their practice to see what can be immediately adopted, and what's the process to that, what's going on with council, and what's going to happen with the mayor's police reform task force.
The big thing is once you're able to change it from just a practice to a policy that's written down, then you can attach disciplinary action to it, because now, you know, once you put it on paper, then you can say, okay, if that happens, then this happens.
Right.
And without it being on paper and it just being a practice, it was a way for officers to kind of skirt the accountability and not be disciplined for those infractions, because it technically wasn't on paper. It wasn't in black and white. And so now it's codified into their policy, as well as our charter at City Hall. Mm-hmm. And so if there is some police misconduct that goes against, you know, some of the things that are expressed in that executive order, then they will be held accountable, or they should be held accountable. And it's our job as the public and your council members to make sure that we put the pressure on the chief of police to make sure that he holds his officers accountable if they do not follow the policy.
And Councilman Pollard, can you go a little bit more into detail, like what are some of the current policies we have in place against police brutality, and how effective are they?
So that's a great question, and I think that's why we're in the process of making HPD update their general orders. If you go on HPD's website right now, it's like super outdated. I think their general orders was last updated in 2015. And that's their governing document of what they can and can't do. And you can go on there right now and you can see things that we don't know if it's relevant or not. And so it's hard to be able to determine what the excessive force policy is, because the current police chief was actually appointed in 2016. And if it wasn't updated since 2015, we don't know if he has made any real changes in his department because it's definitely not on paper. And so this gives us an opportunity to put that in the forefront and make sure that we get a clear understanding of what those policies are when it comes to excessive force. Because I'll be lying to you right now if I told you I knew what they were.
We don't know. And that's a part of the issue. Like, we don't know. And that's why we went to have a meeting with HPD beforehand. So we met with HPD a week before Mr. Floyd passed away. And it was an offline meeting with most of the Black council members. And we had a real conversation. It was the police chief, his two execs, his chief of staff, and the council liaison. And I remember walking out, and the liaison guy was like, you know, I've worked for 3 chiefs, and council members have never come here. Like, I ain't never had a meeting with council. And I just was like, that's odd. But we had real hard conversations, you know. I told them, like, I was pulled over and I thought it was about to go down, and I'm running for office, right? And the anxiety that I had. We asked about how do they assign police to neighborhoods. We asked about calls for service. And so we talked about the independent review board. And that's why our agenda is set the way it is. So we had already, because we're Black, and that's not separate, we don't stop being Black because we're elected. And we understand the perception we have of the laws, because I know to this day, if HPD's behind me, my heart beats fast still, period. So we set our agenda based on that. And we wanted community buy-in. George Floyd happens, kind of like kismet moment, right? So it intensified our efforts. And so on June 25th, we'll have a public safety meeting. And what we had, that meeting was actually supposed to be the same week of budget. And we wanted that meeting to have the public comments and to have the buy-in, because we were going to talk about sound policing, the independent review board, and then the effectiveness of it, because we all had critiques about it, that it's not really an independent review board, right? And so the way it's structured, And so the recommendation that we've made to the mayor, and he's in support of this, is to restructure the whole thing, right? Like that board was authorized in 2011 under a different administration. And so we want to redesign that where it's real equitable and they really do have a voice, because currently the current board, they only deal with internal affairs, those reporting. So you as a, Joe, Jane, Houston, you can't come to the independent review board and make a complaint against Joe officer, right? You got to call the laws to complain about the laws. And who wants to do that? Because you don't feel like you're going to get an honest resolve. So our intention is to restructure that to where it's a two-way, right? And so in its current form, that independent review board makes recommendations to the chief of police for disciplinary action, right? So we want to gut the whole thing and start over. And I think we have support around that, community support around that too. I know that ain't your question, but I'll add that in.
Thank you. I think additionally, like in speaking how initially you were saying that if you go to the police website, right, their policies or orders are outdated 2015, that disconnect between the police officers and the council. So there is a lot of, discussion and push for defunding police and abolishing police, doing away with the system entirely. Like they don't see an opportunity for much reform for something that is so poorly operated. So we have two questions about that. And so the first question, I wanted to direct it to Attorney Allen and Attorney Akubeze. So there's a lot of talk about defunding the police. How could this be effective, and what would be a more useful reallocation of funds? I know, Attorney Allen, you spoke on this and you had some very powerful statements and examples about this in the beginning. So if you want to continue to share about that, that would be helpful.
So a defunding police is something I'm even educating myself about. I know when I first heard the word, I said, okay, what does this look like? What does it mean? And I think it's something that's percolating within the kind of public stratosphere more, but based on the research that I've seen and even some of the cities that have already come out about this, for instance, the mayor, I believe her last name is Breed, out of San Francisco, defunding the police is not about necessarily abolishing the police. And even that term, depending on who you talk to, has some nuance to it. But it's really about saying, what are police supposed to be doing? And why has the police force expanded to so many facets of our life? So I use the example of a Tatiana Jefferson in the Dallas area. Neighbor saw that her door was open. She's never like that. I want to make sure my neighbor is okay. Calls the police to do a welfare check, and within seconds she's killed. If you reallocate funds from the police and move them and create or embolden an unarmed group of folks who come from with a mental health background or dealing with homeless people and things of that nature, when you have a welfare check, you call them and they come out, and you have a less likelihood of something escalating into something violent. When somebody and we've seen this in multiple cities, someone has a history of mental health issues, is unarmed or has like a butcher knife, and police come in and start shooting someone with a known mental health issue. We had that happen in our own city. A woman died like that, and I can't remember her name, but it was like 2019, 2018. In 2018, Danny Ray is out in the middle of the street. His wife, or the woman he was with, had recently killed his children. He was going through bouts of depression. He's in the street, pants hanging down, literally has no way to have a gun on him. And in that interaction, he loses his life. We have to, I think people are really reconsidering, what is it that police should be doing? And why have we allowed their budgets, as we saw in this recent budget, to be increased? People are asking about going through the line items and the allocations for police officers. We're talking about defunding and saying, why is it that we are allowing police offices to have tanks and military grade equipment and using tear gas, which from what I understand from certain international conventions are not supposed to be used anyway? What is the function of police? What should they be armed to do, not only literally in terms of the arms that they have, but also their financing. And so we're decreasing their role and making it more appropriate, where they're only responding to, let's say, violent issues, right? Or there's a murder scene going on or something like that. If they're only responding to those things and focusing on actually investigating murders and things of that nature, for the non-violent things, for the small incidences and occurrences that we have with our homeless community and our mental health folks, then there could be other entities that are empowered financially to help respond. So when I talk about this and other activists and people are talking about defunding the police, some people think that the terminology isn't the best. Get over the schematics and let's get to the issues. And that's what people are talking about, shifting funds that have been increasing year after year for the police department, despite the fact that we're not necessarily getting any safer, and then shifting it to things and resources that might really help to shift some of the dynamics on the ground, including domestic violence issues, so that we can see our communities starting to get better, rather than increasingly at times getting worse, while the police department is becoming more powerful, more monetized, and more militarized.
I think that's well said, Attorney Allen, and I think I would agree and perhaps push the envelope further that I think the semantics are important, right? I don't want the slave abolitionist claiming reform. That's not what I want if I'm the slave, right? And the same is true if you're the person who has been victimized and brutalized by police, and you're in your community for literally hundreds of years. And so I think to have the understanding about the language, it evokes the history. It is not the thing that should be causing us to trip. I personally am for police abolition and have been for a long time. And I think it is understandable that the conversation is scary, right? Because while we recognize the problem with the infrastructure, we also have not existed outside of it, right? And Audre Lorde says, well, you cannot tear down the master's house with the master's tools, right? And so it's a very clear articulation, right, of what is necessary, and yet it is difficult still, right? And so I think understanding the history, right? When we look to London, first police force, we look to, police forces, early police groups, militias throughout Great Britain, and even in the United States, they were constructed to control revolt and rebellion, right? In every scenario. And that is what the modern police department's roots are, right? And so the conversation about, like, if you just say that, like, do we want bullies on our streets telling us what to do? People are gonna say no. But when you use the terminology police, and people are, oh, but wait, what about the good apples? And it's like, well, perhaps we're coming to this reckoning in America where we're recognizing that it's not about bad apples, but about bad orchards. And we can actually do something to uproot those systems. And that takes some collective work, right? And some thought exercises that people have to be courageous and bold enough to have. And so I think the conversation has to be about not just, it can't be police reform and police abolition. I think for me, and that's a strong stance that I take, I think it's, as an organizer, I understand that power is not infinite, and it's either built or shifted, right? And it takes a great amount of resources to come together collectively to do either of those two things. And so if our resources are being deployed out in the world for police reform, we are not using those same resources for police abolition. And we have what's called a competitor effect, when we actually should be allies marching towards the same direction, right? And that's not for me to decide, right? It's for the community to decide and to develop a mechanism to do so. But I think when you have those conversations about police reform, what you're talking about is asking folks to chip away at an infrastructure that is not helpful. But when we reform the things that we actually can name, right? We actually can put a price tag on how much it would cost to end homelessness in the city of Houston. we can do that. Like, it's not impossible. We can put a price tag on every single person arrested for a DWI is automatically funneled into we can put a price tag on that. We have the numbers. We can do, it's not far-fetched, right? So we can actually reform and correct the problems. And then when we look at that price tag and we say, wow, there's some social issues we actually could handle. Where do we get that money from? Perhaps police, right? And then we see the correlation is, well, look at all of the roles police have been serving. They show up when people are drunk. They show up when people are homeless. They show up when people have problems. They're not, I mean, I have police in my family. They spend the bulk of their time, like their bad days are not, oh man, I shot an innocent person today. It's all the paperwork I had to do, all the reports I had to file. Can you believe I got debt? Like it is a waste of resources, right? City of Houston spends almost nearly $1 billion on police. That's aggressive. So when we think about what's been invested in that infrastructure and how terrible reform has been, right? We look to 2014, Eric Garner, chokehold, killed him. Then there's no chokeholds allowed. And then here we are with a knee on the neck in 2020, May 25th, 2020. It's easy, right, to see that perhaps the conversation around reform is now outdated. And we are getting to the position where we have to look at defunding. We have to look at abolition.
I just want to quickly applaud everything that you said. And I think when you were speaking, what I thought about was, and I wish I could give them credit when I heard this term, but it stuck with me because as I was reading and trying to learn more about defunding the police and abolition and all of the wonderful, important words that you said, and I'm glad that you challenged me on that, is radical imagination in this time, radically reimagining what's possible because we've only seen one thing. And we come from a people who had to radically imagine what it meant to be free in a land they didn't know. You know what I mean? Like, that's in our blood. And so reclaiming that power, shifting the power base from things outside of ourselves and knowing that we have the power to build the coalitions, to do the work, however long it takes within our time, within this generation, I think is so important. So as I heard you say, and I was like, yeah, radical reimagination, we have to keep pushing maybe where it makes us uncomfortable, and thinking about systems that literally just needed to be uprooted because their roots are entrenched in our oppression. So shout out to you. I just had to say that. I'm sorry.
Appreciate it. I agree with you.
Yeah, thank you so much for pushing and opening up the conversation, for shifting it to police abolition, which is what our next question is. And I think you already spoke about it, but I also want to directly ask and point it to Attorney Ajay as well. So what would a system in public safety look like in a community without police? What does that like radical imagination look like? What are these systems without like public safety? What would that look like for us?
I mean, I think this is still an idea that's still developing and still forming. I think for me, part of the reason why I think that we want to have a society where there are going to be less deaths is because we have a police force that, even though a lot of money has been devoted to it, is that like America compared to other countries has a lot of people who are getting 6 months of training and then now have license to have a gun and to go into really difficult situations that I think I get, especially when I was at the DA's office and there were cases where police officers were on the stand. I mean, I mean, at some level you do have to, and I think as a lawyer you have to see it both ways. I do get that we have, police officers who are being put in a situation and then they overreact. But then like when someone dies, someone has to be held accountable for that. And we don't want to put people in a situation where they shouldn't be killing someone, whether that's because they're just racist or they're poorly trained and they're overwhelmed by the situation. When we want to have a society where if I call someone because there's an emergency, I don't want the concern being, am I going to be killed by the people who are coming out to help me? But that should never happen. There's a reason why in like the Nordic countries, like Finland and Sweden, why police officers, like people who are going to be in that, are being trained for like 2 years before they go out there in the street. The sense that we're just letting people to go out there, and obviously like they go out and they're supposed to have a field training officer, and so we have a different, we do have something in place, but I think that if there was ever a moment, the moment is now to try to do something that hasn't been done before, where we can have people who are going to go out, who are going to respond to emergencies, particularly with mental health. I mean, if I was to categorize the most challenging group that we have that is a consistent contingency in the criminal justice system, it's people who are suffering from some level of mental health, particularly when in some cases in DWIs, but particularly when it comes to drug-related cases and domestic abuse cases. A lot of time in assault cases, a lot of times it's there's a misunderstanding that has happened, and it's because that there's some sort of either chemical imbalance or there's a mental health issue. And if there was someone that was out there that didn't have the temptation of having a gun or some tactic that would kill and maim someone, I think that we would have a better success rate as far as in alleviating some of the issues that plague our system. So, I mean, I think ideally what would happen is either you would have a unit where you have a unit that responds to an emergency that isn't a police officer, so they don't have a gun, and maybe there'll be a compromise where there'll either be police officers that have to be accompanied by like a social worker, and with the hope that maybe that helps to de-escalate the situation. But this is probably the time. This is the time now, I think, to do radical experimentation. I mean, there are organizations like Campaign Zero that have been pushing for policies as far as in promoting better training and more de-escalation. Mm-hmm. I feel like when they say more training for police officers, there's been a lot of talk about it. And I think the police union will say that they're getting a lot of this training, but we're seeing evidence that doesn't seem to meet up with that rhetoric. And so if there's a time, I think it's now. But I think that we would send more people out that would be trained to respond to emergencies, to de-escalate the situation, and wouldn't have a gun, so that it doesn't. And if it gets to the point where there needs to be force used, then we'd have a system in place in order to do that.
Okay, thank you for that. Like attorney, you have something to add to that, Attorney Nneka?
Yeah, thank you. I didn't mean to speak over you, by the way. I think we also, and I want to take an opportunity to try to push the conversation about abolition a little further. I think we have to call it out for what it is, right? It's not just about less death, right? It's not just about police brutality, because that's the most visible, right? Oh my goodness, someone has just been murdered on camera in front of the public or off camera, right? But we see those images frequently, but it's about less fear, right? I don't raise your hand if you saw that video of the little boy. I think he saw the officer coming down the street and he hit instinctively, right? Hid behind the car and went right back. I mean, it's that we're fighting against, right? Just to be clear, it's not just the killing, it's the fear, it's the terror, it's the loss of our dignity, it's the pain that comes from growing up in a country where that is the lived reality for people with this skin tone, right? So that's what we're fighting against. So then we ask ourselves, okay, well, what is policing really about? And we cannot say that same system is simultaneously about protecting the public. It is not, right? And I have a quote from Alex Vitale. He wrote at the end of policing, and he said, the police exist primarily as a system for managing and even producing inequality by suppressing social movements and tightly managing the behaviors of the poor and non-white people, right? So his thought process behind that is, there is a role in society for police. You have been told it is to protect you. I'm suggesting there is another reality and another truth, right? And I'm not saying that all the human beings who wear that uniform are evil or terrible, or right? That's not my commentary. There are many, many people who put on that uniform with good intentions and go out in the world and actually do good, right? To be clear, I'm talking about the infrastructure, right? And so if we can name it like, okay, this infrastructure exists to harm us, to leave us in a society where that Black boy will always hide behind a car, then it's an easy conversation to say, let's get rid of that system, as opposed to like tinkering with it, which is the reform. And so I think we can't demand, on the other hand, we can't demand abolition without recognizing that there is space for other reform, right? We have to, if the police support the current policy, right, we have to change the policy they support, right? Because that also goes hand in hand. And that, I think, is a bit of the dialogue of this evening, right? Where we need to say, well, let's reform immigration. ICE is scooping up people with unbridled discretion, right? And they're using police to do, like police forces or agencies and entities to do so, right? They're policing that community. Let's reform how we think about drug laws, not just drug use, right? Let's reform how we think about healthcare system, the education system, right? So then when we do those things and our efforts are, you will see that the actual use for police will decrease. The system they once upheld will be deconstructed. Right. And so I'm not just saying like wipe away all police and let's see what happens, right? A purge sort of scenario of free for all, but that we can actually be intentional about systematically deconstructing this system that exists to harm us in a very real way. And we have to name that. We have to call it out for what it is.
Thank you for that. And so we're going to ask the last couple of questions, and then we're going to open it up to the floor. I believe we have Ray Shackelford in the building. Ray, if you want to quickly introduce yourself, and while you're also doing that, I'm going to pose this question to you. Can you discuss what our roles as individuals are as it relates to voting? I know we already talked about just kind of like policies, procedures. We talked about implementation of policy. We talked about the order of, you know, how policies come down. We're more of a mayor-based system here in the city of Houston. So you quickly introduce yourself and then just kind of talk about the importance of voting and just the education behind the vote.
So yes, good evening, everyone. My name is Ray Shackelford. I serve as National President for the National Urban League Young Professionals. I've also served on the Independent Police Oversight Board that Councilwoman Thomas referenced earlier, along with the body camera audit team, and currently serve on the Houston Housing Finance Corporation. Specifically to your question as it relates to voting and how people can engage, one of the things that has come out of this pandemic, I think now more than ever, it's easier for people to see how their votes impact their day-to-day lives. That has not always been the easiest thing to illustrate. But when you look at how people are having to fight for everyday needs, even more so now, those disparities and inequities that they've been faced with for a long time are even being more so highlighted. When you're talking about housing, you have a lot of people that have the inability to pay rent, unemployment, a lot of the jobs, the whole manner in which this crisis has been handled from the federal level and even here at the state level. And depending on who you talk to, some people would argue with how it's been handled here in the city and at the county level. And so all of that is tied to your vote. And we always say that your vote is your voice. And so when you're not exercising that right, you're leaving it up to chance and you're letting other people speak on your behalf. And so as a citizen, it is our duty to inform ourselves as it relates to the process. We have a runoff election taking place on July the 14th. The last day to register to vote was June the 15th. And so hopefully everybody on the call is registered. If not, make sure that you are registered for the general election, but understanding the importance of local elections versus federal elections. They both matter. I would argue that local elections impact your life more because that's what you see in your day-to-day, and that's why a lot of people have been advocating and pushing our local city council and our mayor, but also, as Councilwoman Thomas pointed out, the power dynamics in our city structure based on the charter are much more dependent upon the mayor. So in our last municipal election, you had anywhere from 10 to 12% of the registered voters in this city show up and participate in that election. So that means you had at least 80% of the registered voters that did not participate. And how many of those people are now showing up and saying that they want something different? And so you have to keep that in mind. You have to participate in the census because there's literally hundreds of billions of dollars that are tied to that. And it comes, at least a portion of it comes out of taxpayer money. And that's tied to funding when you're talking about roads, infrastructures, hospitals, SNAP, TANF, school lunch programs, a plethora of things. And so our civic duty is very, very heavy. It's something that they have not focused on in schools. And I believe that is intentional. Because if they educate everybody on the process, more people will participate.
You went silent, Ray.
And make sure that you're elected to council accountable, participating in city council meetings, commissioner meetings. All of those things are important, and that's how you move things forward within the community.
Right. Thank you so much for hopping in on that. So now, for sake of time, we do want to move into the open forum and allowing the participants to ask their questions. So me and Edidiong will be taking questions from the chat as well as here. So if you raise a hand, we can do our best to try to get to you. I think we're starting with one of the questions from the chat that I saw earlier from Jason Oliver. It says, we're seeing a push for the DA to take less cases by declining to press charges, like with the 600 plus people arrested during the protest. How can we effectively advocate for that? So this is open to any of the panelists.
So I think I received an email of something similar, but I think what's still happening is that the charges are still on the record, or that's not clear. So I think we have to, I think council would be willing, the Black folks at least, to do a letter of support and around that, because someone called me about it maybe the other day, and I was like, but they're released, right? They're dropping the charges. She was like, nah, it's still gonna be on their record. Like, these are young kids, like that. And so I was like, oh, wow. So I think that full continuum, because there is momentum, and I think people know that it was a protest, people have the space to do that. I mean, I think there's something that we can do in terms of making that an issue so they don't have that on their record, right? Because then that's a slippery slope into other things. So I know I'm willing to do that. And I don't know what other avenue, but totally willing, however we can make that happen for these young people to get that off their record.
So I guess just real quick, whenever you have a case, so the state or the prosecutor, the DA has the power to dismiss a case because they have the power to bring a case, they have the power to dismiss a case. So when the state dismisses the case, then you either being held in custody or anything like that, the case is done. However, there's a second part to it, right? Because if you're looking for a job or anything like that, you still have to disclose and say, well, I've been arrested, or if anyone's looking in, they can see that you had some sort of charge going on. So if you want it erased from your record, then you have to get it what's called expunged. And that is an order that is typically drafted by an attorney who then submits it to the court, and usually the state, they can put a statement saying whether they are opposed or unopposed to it. And then the judge signs the order, and then that is an order to destroy any records in pertaining to you being arrested, your mugshot, you being in the system, so you can legally deny it, that you were ever arrested and that it didn't happen. So when people are saying that, that's what they're saying, is like, we want to, in order to get that off of your record, even though your case is ultimately dismissed, and you can say, if someone asks you about it, well, I wasn't convicted of it, that the state dropped the case, that's what that means.
And I think we should advocate at the state level that if your case is dismissed, like, you don't have to go through all the hoops of getting an expungement and having to drop that, get a lawyer, drop the paperwork, go up to court. but maybe put some parameters in it to where if your case is dismissed and you don't get another charge within 3 months, then it's automatically expunged or something like that. There's so many roadblocks along the way that cripple people. And someone earlier said knowledge is power. That's true. Most people wouldn't know, hey, they got it dismissed and they think they can go on with their life, but it's still showing up in that registrar. When the cop pulls you over and he runs your license plate, he still sees it. And so we have to do things that advocate for breaking down those barriers. And I think that's one thing at the state level. Collectively, all of us, maybe we can join together in writing letters to our state representatives based on that. And that could be something as a plethora of organizations that's something that you all want to do. The legislative session starts in January. Legislators are starting to get their agenda together. That can be something that we take the lead on. If there's something that we want to fight for, let's take it past this town hall and collectively write those letters and get our friends and family to write those letters. That's how you start to make a movement.
Yeah, I think just to add on that, I would say two things. One is that, so on some of these cases, there is like a statutory requirement that says that you have to wait a certain period of time before you can apply for an expungement, and that's something that has to be handled at the state level. But I think too, the DA does have programs where they will, on their own, will help people to do an expungement, and they've done that in the past. And that is something that I think if you can put pressure or on the DA whenever that statutory period is coming up, then they can make sure that either they are going to say that they agree or that they are going to help do that so that people can do that pro se if they don't necessarily need to have an attorney to do it for them, because it's pretty challenging to do it if you're charged with it on your own. Like you'll need an attorney unless you do one of the programs that's being offered by the DA's office.
One of the policies that I thought about, it will probably never pass anytime soon until we get changes in leadership. But just like on the civil side, if you lose, you have to pay the other side's attorney's fees. You know, we should have that on the criminal side. If you beat the prosecution and you had to go through paying your attorney's fees and going through that, then the state will have to pay your attorney's fees. I think a lot of frivolous arrests would stop. A lot of these unnecessary cases and charges would stop because you hit people in their pockets. And those are the type of things that I think if we did not have, we would have a much more just society. And we have to understand that when people say that the system is broken, the system is not broken. The system is set up purposely for what is taking place. Everything that is supposed to happen in our communities is happening because of this system. So we have to find ways to dismantle it in a very smart and creative way. It can't be reckless and it can't just be spur of the moment and emotional, but finding ways that we can work together to systematically break the system that is in place. And I think that even goes back to the defunding the police department and what does that look like? And you all's comments have even opened my eyes some to look at it a little differently. I'm not one to sit here and say today that I'm for defunding the police department, but I am for reallocating funds within the police department to have a more modern approach to policing. We ask police to do too much. We should not have, you know, I rode under the freeway the other day and I saw, you know, some people camping out. And I said, I need to call the sergeant and see if he can look into the matter. Well, why would a police officer need to look into that? Why wouldn't that be more of a social worker or a mental health expert, right? And we ask our police to do so much, and of course they're going to be overwhelmed. The biggest thing with the police is some of the police are racist. That is the biggest issue. I mean, I don't care if you take away half the police officers. If you're not able to find ways to hold officers that are currently there accountable and to get them out of the department, then we're always going to have issues. You're just going to shift racist people to a different department. All right. Racist people are racist people. They're either going to be racist social workers, they're going to be racist mental health experts, they're going to be racist police officers. The thing about the police officers, they just have that gun and they have that authority to kill. But we really have to find ways as a society to have meaningful and open and honest dialogue on what we want for our children and our grandchildren. What society do we want to live in? Because it's just full of divisiveness, it's full of hate. And just by defunding something is not going to answer all the problems. We have to really think about how can we work together better as human beings, more so than anything. And that's going to be tough to do.
I just want to quickly also name, we can vote, right? We can vote people out of office, particularly those who don't do the things that help us, right? In fact, more specifically, those who do the things that harm us. If we look to Kim Ogg, her department, right, her office chose to, right, make those arrests, right? Issue those charges, excuse me, the police. You know, Art Acevedo was on CNN in the morning, George Floyd protest June 2nd. That evening, his officers were kettling, meaning surrounding protesters, forcing them into a fence where they stood for hours, were bleeding and bruised from their zip ties, stayed in the gymnasium, had their masks removed, right? We can list the name of human rights violations and affront to their First Amendment rights. This is what's happening in the city, but the dialogue is like, oh, well, let's maybe tweak it, see what happens. But like, people's actual rights are being violated. So I think we can, I agree, you know, with Alvin in that it's a little bit more challenging because you do have statutory requirements. There's some people now who by the statute, Class B misdemeanor or whatever, it has to, the state has a year to prosecute should they choose, right? And that's not something that will change quickly, but we can name it as like, this is the permanent mark you've put on a person's record. Some of these folks are college students coming up from Sam Houston, and now they just graduated and they have a record, right? That's the work that Kim Ogg's department chose to do, right? It's prosecutorial discretion, right? That is the issue. And I think we can vote, and we can vote her. To be honest, I'm not for any particular candidate. I'm for change. And so if she's the person who has those policies and she is willing to stand on those policies and not change her tune, then yeah, talk about what it looks like on election day, right? That's our power.
Thank you. I have a raised hand from Sir Duke, so I want to allow you to ask your question. If you want to unmute yourself.
You said me, right? Hey, how you guys doing, man? Awesome thing, man. I'm proud of all of you guys, man. I've learned a lot, especially from Tiffany and NECA and Councilman, I can't see it as E.CHRYS, but you guys, man, I just wanted to ask, like, so this is from me listening, and I don't want to say playing devil's advocate. I do know, but I don't know enough, but my issue is if we don't have a majority of people that believe in or are even going out to vote for a cause that we may personally feel needs to be changed, what then is the next step? Even if we do go and vote, these racist people or these people that are benefiting off of how this system is set up, there's a majority of them still wanting it to stay that way. When we do reach that roadblock and now we're there, what's the next thing? Because we can't continue to just get shot or continue to just wait and continue to watch us die and continue to watch the kids hide behind police cars and continue and just here waiting. What is the next thing to change that, and how can we do that? Because it's like, I imagine, and I'm just saying hypothetically, let's say all of you guys now are people that we appointed into office. We then voted, and then for some reason you guys didn't get the vote you needed for us to get you, in office for this change to happen. What would now be the next step now? Or do we just stop?
Well, to answer your question, it may not happen overnight. I mean, it may not happen to where all your issues and concerns get addressed overnight. I mean, we've been oppressed for decades and generations, and to think that one election cycle is going to automatically change a system that has been set up to oppress us it's unrealistic. But what you have to do is you have to keep pressing, and that's why when it comes to some of the events that have recently taken place, we'll have these discussions and we'll have these collaborations, and then it'll be for a moment. But they have to be consistent. I mean, they have to be like Councilmember Thomas said, they have to be consistent. You may only get 2 people elected into office, but you needed 4. That means you may have to wait till the next cycle to get another 2 to add to them, right? Until you get the majority. But that doesn't mean that you stop or you get complacent. And so in our democracy, of course, who shows up controls. In the city of Houston, the average age of voter is 63 years old, okay? They're much older than we are. In my district, District J, the average age of voter was 67 years old, all right? And if we have the numbers, we're just not showing up. If we had that same excitement that we had at the protest during the 2 weeks of early vote, then I think you would start to get your issues and concerns heard more in a larger space. Because in politics, there are 2 things that matter most: money and people. If you have a lot of money, you can change things. If you have a lot of people, you can change things. If you have a lot of people and a lot of money, then you're really rolling, right? And so that's why you see other groups that may not look like us, and some that do, that start these PACs, and they have issues and candidates that they push, and they put the funding behind it. And then they also collaborate and get their churches to roll to the polls and vote, right? But we don't have enough of it. And a lot of it is because we haven't been educated enough. We haven't, we didn't grow up thinking that voting was important. And then what we end up with is the average age being a 67-year-old white woman who's retired, who shows up, right? And votes. And guess what? Me and Tiffany have to knock on her door and figure a way to do what we can do so that she can vote us in. But at the end of the day, it's really you all's issues and concerns that we are trying to address. And many of the things that you all have been talking about today even opened my eyes, and I appreciate all you all's comments, even when it comes to defunding and the abolition of policing. What does that look like? Because it pushes us to understand what we need to be focused on to represent you most. But to answer your question directly, you just keep going. You don't stop just because you didn't get everything you wanted in one election cycle. It's not going to happen like that. You just got to keep pushing.
And I wanted to add to Councilman Pollard's statement, because I think one of the important things for us to acknowledge is not only is, it's going to take a long time for us to accomplish, well, not a long time, it's going to take time, I should say, to accomplish the progress that we want. But it's not just about the vote. All of these things are connected. And just because we vote, that is not a cure-all for all the problems that we have, and specifically in the Black community. You're talking about a people that was enslaved for 250 years. Then you're talking about Jim Crow, Reconstruction. We've only been free, and you can argue the level of freedom, maybe in excess of 50 years. And so I would encourage everybody to look at Ta-Nehisi Coates' case for reparations, where he breaks down much of what we've gone through as a people, and even looking at the current incarceration system when you look at the new Jim Crow. And so our sister NECA, much of what she mentioned in terms of all these different systems, whether it's the criminal justice system, specifically talking about police, education, the public health system, and ultimately racism, which is at the core of it. One of the things we lost in integration that I hear from a lot of baby boomers, our elders, is the sense of community. So what we're doing tonight and what Edidiong and some of the organizers are bringing together the African community and the African American community. If we would all come together and be unified, not necessarily uniform, but unified towards a common goal, because we don't have to go about it the same way. But as long as we're all strategic and intentional about pushing for progress for our people, then we will be able to make the type of progress that we want to see. But it's not just about voting. It's not just about the census. Are we buying Black? Are we investing in our neighborhoods? All of those things matter, and we have to do all of them in order to get to where we're trying to go.
Thank you.
Can I make one small point? I'll add to that. So I think, we talk about public safety, we've centered the police department as the focus of that conversation, but public safety is much larger than just the police, right? So I chair housing and community affairs for the city. So under housing, we have solid waste, homelessness, veterans, and housing and community affairs. So the disaster funds that we have that they put in the news, like Houston's irresponsible, and we've only built 5 Harvey houses, right? That's the story. So the money that the General Land Office sent us, one of the reasons why we have issues with building our homes is because the General Land Office only wants to authorize 2-bedroom homes. Okay, so in most of these neighborhoods that have been impacted by flooding are Black and brown that had 3 and 4 bedroom homes. And the GLO says, well, Houston, this is wasteful spending. So y'all are wasteful, right? So we're using local dollars in order to make these people home. But you're talking about deep-seated oppression that these people are now only worthy of 2-bedroom homes, right? But when we have housing committee, I rarely have any comments about that, unless it's, some angry developer. So we have to look at the whole 360 of our neighborhoods. From a public safety to a housing to making sure we actually live in the city. You'd be surprised how many people talking about what the mayor of Houston is doing, and they live in Fort Bend County. They live in Fort Bend, right? So you don't pay into the tax base, you can't vote into the system, you can't participate in a certain way. So if we are going to be strategic, we have to look at where we buy our homes, the schools we go to, this is where we send our kids, where we spend our dollars. Ray mentioned that, because there's an entire thing we have to unravel, and we really do have to unravel it, and we have to recreate it. So, just repeating, like, you have to stick to it. But the good thing about it is that it's a different type of council this year, this cycle, where we're collaborative, and then we listen. And so, but I want to be clear, just because it doesn't show up in the form or in the way that you think it should happen in that moment does not mean that it's not in queue. So yeah, I mean, it's a hard ask to stay involved with something that is heartbreaking. And I remember saying maybe a couple of years ago, like, I would typically raise money for a candidate or to write a check. And I said, I'm just so disappointed, because I'm always disappointed, right? Like, then we do all of this and we pump you up and then we get you there. And then when it's time for us, because you came to us because you're Black. And then now when we come to you because we're Black, then we're put on the back end. And so I understand the upset and the frustration with that. But I'm telling you, it's a different move happening at City Hall with the Black folk. I can tell you that. I don't know about nobody else, but the Black folk, I can tell you that. So I think we do have an opportunity to strike. I think we need to be strategic in our strike, and it has to come from multiple places. I think for, just in this conversation alone and just reading the chat line in the chat, everyone has different perceptions and definitions of what defund is. So if the people got different definitions, then how do we strategically strike, right? So we have to get clear about our agenda and what we want, and then we co-create that together based on the system. We know how to push it, and then how do we get the feedback from the people when we do collaborate and we come together? We're moving in step, right? Like, we're all saying the same thing, and we can actually, draft the language for the legislation. We can actually push this stuff. So I think we have a great opportunity. We just have to stick to it for sure.
Okay. This question is from Kelvin. And I guess this can go towards the council members. Why did the council members vote against Council Member Plummer amendments in regards to redirecting police funding to mental health and et cetera? I know in the chat, there's been a lot of discussion about mental health and, as you mentioned before, about defunding and reallocating funds. And so the question again is, why did the council members vote against Councilmember Plummer's amendments to redirect police funding to mental health?
Well, that's an inaccurate statement. No one voted against the amendment. Her amendment was actually referred to committee for further discussion and public input, which is the committee that having on this Tuesday at 10 a.m. And so it will be virtual just like this, so everyone can chime in and tune in. So her amendment was never voted down. It was just referred for further discussion. And it's for discussions such as this, so we can understand if we are to reallocate those dollars for mental health or other programming and training, that we're doing the vetting to understand what does that look like? How much is that gonna cost? What does that new modern idea of policing look like? And so that's gonna be a collaborative effort. And we have said as council members that within the next 90 days that we want to present to the mayor and to the public a robust reform package that is going to touch on a myriad of different issues, because this is a huge issue that's pressing for all of us, and we want to make sure that we get it right. So just to make clear, know that no one voted against her amendment. It did not vote down. It just got referred to the committee for further discussion.
And also to clarify, she didn't offer budget amendments. Our colleague offered policy recommendations. So policy recommendations don't live in the budget. They live at committee, and that's where we do that. And so 5 of us wrote a letter because we received that question, because when you put something out there on social media and you've never seen it before, it becomes the baseline of language, right? And then people adopt that language as if it's factual. Again, not knowing how the system moves. Those weren't budget amendments. And so several of those that she withdrew before the discussion, they were removed. So we weren't even able to talk about them. And you can watch the council meeting, and I mean, there's much support around all of that. I mean, to be frank, majority of that will probably be adopted. The critique and what we offered was that we have to have robust conversation. You can't have a side conversation with a limited group of organizations and then expect to say that's public engagement. It's not, right? So it goes back to the whole transparency thing. I need to make sure that I can get to District F and have real conversations and talk about, tell me what you want to see, right? And if you don't have that opportunity to do that, then it doesn't make for good public policy. So we're going to hear all of that through Public Safety Committee. There's nothing that was voted down. The budget passed unanimously because there was nothing, and I think there was someone made a statement about an additional $1 billion. I read that. That's inaccurate. The budget increase was only 1%. So the increase that the police received was based on their 2018 contractual agreement. It was their pension and their health benefits when we did pension reforms for the fire department. So that's what it is. So when LA had what, $1.8 billion in addition to removed, they weren't receiving that in Houston. So because we have a property revenue cap, we don't have a sales tax cap. We have a property revenue cap. Our dollars are limited. We still have a $162 million budget gap. So, you know, those are kind of the other things that are happening around the budget that most people aren't clear about. But again, everyone can participate at that committee meeting and then can chime in on what you would like to see in terms of those programming. We just ask to have more time to investigate and look at what we are doing currently in HPD, what we're not doing, and then how we can adopt these programs and redirect funds.
Thank you for that. Okay, and so my next question is in regards to the African community, and anybody can speak towards this. Obviously in District F and District J, there is a high community of Africans in your districts. We talk about funding, we talked about voting, and as both of you guys know, in your district specifically, there are higher cases of undocumented citizens, but they are wanting to be involved with this movement. And so you're hearing also on the news that ICE is coming. You want to vote, but you're not able to. So my question is to anybody, and this is to any of the attorneys, the activists, and the council members. What are some ways or suggestions that these people in our community can be involved, whether it's at a policy level or just engaging with the movement of social injustice, whatever that looks like? How can these people be engaged if they're not able to vote and they're not able to, or they kind of apprehensive to protesting? What are some other ways to get them involved, especially within District F and District J?
So within District J, most of our neighborhoods have what's called like super neighborhood groups, and those consist of residents, stakeholders, nonprofit leaders, faith-based community, And it's an opportunity for the community to come together and talk about how they want their community to look. You know, you're able to advocate amongst each other about certain issues and concerns that you have, and those get directed straight to our office as city council members. We'll have our staff present at those offices to hear what those issues and concerns are. And so that's one easy way. And if you all, I'll send you my my email address so that you all can send me your email addresses, and I can put you in our newsletter database so you can get notices for these type of community meetings. A lot of our undocumented and some of our immigrant community are really faith-based, right? They have their faith-based institutions that they go to on a regular basis. And I think it's important for the faith community to be able to put together their own groups on what they want to see and have someone represent them that reaches out to their representatives. It's no one size fits all approach. It's just collectively coming together as a community and being able to have someone that takes the lead on conveying those issues and concerns to your representatives, whether it's at council or your state representative. But collectively, you should have a voice. And there are, one way is through the super neighborhood groups in your particular community. And I know that they have the ear of our office.
I also want to quickly just, while we're talking about folks being heard in one way or another, one kind of easy way, if you will, right now, and we really have to talk to immigrant communities about, especially in light of some of the stuff that the Trump administration was trying to do at one point, is to complete the census.
Right.
So much is tied to that, and as Naneka was talking about earlier, about how there's so many interconnections of different issues and different ways I think there's different ways and levels of involvement, and that is something that we all need to do, immigrants and non-immigrants. But I know at one point there was this question about the citizenship question, and that was just the fact that that information was going out was already starting to paralyze and bring down the willingness of immigrant communities to be able to fill out the census. They also sent out sample census with those questions that weren't at the actual census. So there are some people who actually received a citizenship-based census, even though that's not the actual census, it's more of a sampling testing type of thing. Thankfully, through the work of NAACP and so many other organizations that are too long to name on this call, showing how effective coalitions can work, that was shot down. And so we don't have to be concerned about people having to answer a question about their citizenship, but it's important. And then now, so with COVID-19, a lot of people kind of sheltering in place.
Right.
A lot of people who would normally go and knock, people are either apprehensive about answering or things of that. So just added another level to it, but we really need to talk about all communities filling out and completing the census, but especially making sure that we're intentional about doing that in immigrant communities and minority communities, because we tend to be undercounted. That means we are underfunded. And when we're talking about drawing the lines of representation, which is always a contentious issue, we need to be counted because your voting power matters on that as well. Sure. So, and it kind of goes back to a question Sir Duke had, and I'm gonna wrap up. We as quote unquote educated people who've arrived to some level, we got some letters behind our name, we got some good branding on the websites, whatever, however you feel about yourself, the fact that you're on your call, you're probably one of those folks. We have to do a better job of walking with our brothers and sisters who have not necessarily arrived to a certain level, who don't talk a certain way, who don't manage to get out into the burbs and have a gated community, the ghetto girl, the this, that girl, whatever, all of the things that we're talking, way we like to talk about each other. And that's why when some folks were on TV talking about you shouldn't be burning down this and that, folks were like, well, you don't really see it for us either. Like there's some things we need to talk about. Right. Another discussion, but we to make sure that when we're talking about people, we're not just talking about a Democratic Party, which everyone has a right to feel like they have not delivered for us. We certainly, this is not political. You may not be talking, they may not want to vote for a Republican Party person because of the things that they feel like not delivered to their community. But what we can say to people is, and one time I was doing Know Your Rights clinics, intentionally targeting like barbershops and so forth, where people tend to congregate, and then also talking about election things. And telling them things like, one, if you're off paper, everybody knows what that means. If you're off paper, you can vote. We need to make sure you're registered. Step number 2 is, let's talk about what's really on the ballot. You know how to keep pulling you over and sending you to jail for low amounts of marijuana? That's on the ballot, right? At one point that was on the ballot. Somebody was running for decriminalizing, or at least handing out citations instead of actually arresting people for low-level marijuana possession. We need to start talking about, okay, what tends to matter for our community? Who's running on that agenda that we can trust, especially those who happen to be lawyers and may know some of these folks that we believe in? And this is what on the ballot. And we also need to talk to people about the times that our vote matter, right? In 2018, we elected a record number of Black women to the bench, 19 to be exact. Some were being reelected. That's a whole nother thing, right? They were able to then join with someone we already had on the bench, Judge Jordan, who was the sole judge who was trying to push for bail reform, to the point that our city spent millions of dollars trying to defend something that was oppressive to our people. They got together, and within days it was settled, because those judges got with the one Black judge who was standing up for us in the gap at the time and made a reform. Our votes have been successful. We have to talk about the successes too. We have to talk about the fact that we have an executive order, although there's a lot of criticism for it from our mayor now, matters because we had some city council folks there who looked like us and talked for us. And there were people marching on the streets with all sorts of immigration status, dealing with stuff from the police when the camera started to walk away and the platitudes were done. And because their voices were being heard, and because they were consistent, them same people sometimes we don't like to hang out with the ones in the street doing the dirty work, so then we can sit in this conversation talking about how we're gonna pass policy in the polished rooms that we like to be in. So we all matter, and we need to start figuring out how we have conversations with our people in the different, from the 5th ward to the 4th ward to the 3rd ward, and make it real and say, brother, I need you on this. This is what's real. That sister who didn't, who allowed your client, your cousin or whoever to get a pretrial diversion instead of having a record. So at the end of it, it can be immediately expunged. That sister is because we voted last time. So I need you to do the same thing, because here's who's on the ballot. Here's who's trying to jack things up and make changes. And if we adopt a language and we put our feet on the ground and start knocking on doors of people who look like us, we can turn out the vote if we know what's real and what's important. So I think I diverted a little bit.
No, it was good. Stacey was telling the people this is what it's gonna be, okay? Don't let those degrees get it twisted. Stacey was letting y'all know, don't y'all do that now.
Forever to get naturalized. Yeah. But that stopped me from raising my voice. And when immigrant communities, there's all sorts of stories I have going through the immigration system. One of the reasons I'm an attorney is because I was disrespected in there as if I didn't know English and I knew great English. Wow. But I had some horrible experience in the immigration, and then I decided to be an attorney. I don't practice immigration. It's too heartbreaking for me, but it's important. People who are immigrants, this nation is built largely on immigrants. Don't let your status stop you. And when we band together as a group, standing by yourself is scary. When we band together as a group of people, we can make resounding change and noise. You may not be able to vote, but you can drive somebody to the polls. You may not be able to vote, but you can educate somebody on an issue. You may not be able to vote doors for a candidate and hand out information about voting. And this year is going to be critical. We saw all sorts of shenanigans at the polls last year. The more that we empower people that look like us, the more that people who are traditionally in those positions, even those who might be on the same party, are going to be upset because they wanted a blue wave, but they didn't want it to be a black blue wave. Right. And so we have to be able to stand with our people, and your status does not affect that. I'm done. I'm sorry.
No, Stacey, that was great. I just want to add one thing to her census point is that the most undercounted census tract in the city, Ed and I share that, and that's the Midwest. So that you're talking high dense areas, multifamily developments, lots of apartments, lots of immigrant refugee areas. It's the lowest counted census tract in the entire city. So, you know, there's a lot that we can do around that. We've been working to make sure that the language, that the marketing materials, all of that, working with our partners, our African Christian Fellowship Group, all of that, that everybody knows, because typically when you hear immigrant, people think of like Latinos, right? They don't think about African immigrants. And so they're not even in that conversation. And I will tell you, as recently as yesterday, Councilmember Pollard and I had a brief meeting with the mayor because we were talking about the management district, and we were saying we need to appoint people in positions of power that are African, not just African American, Black Americans that are African, because we share the Bissonnette corridor. So we've already started strategically saying some of these city posts, we need to move a certain way, right? And so what's really critical about the momentum that we have just here is that I know an ask I have is when there's a city board or a commission or any type of appointment, I'm always scrambling for names. I don't have a database of people where I can be like, who can I appoint? And I need to be able to have that, right? So we have to start looking at, everyone's not going to be the block walker. Everyone's not going to be the one going to the meetings. Everyone's not going to do that. And it's unrealistic to say that, but we can make a decision about who goes where, right? You're going to go, we're going to get you appointed to the city board. You're going to be the one who runs for office. You're going to be the one who runs the organization. So then we have a net. And when I was a member of KeyPack, years ago when we first formed, we had no idea, we used to be called Power Pack, and we had no idea what a political action committee was. And we each broke down material and we read it and we studied it. So when we came to our meetings, we knew exactly what we were doing and how we thought our financial report and all those things. So those are part of the things that we can be strategic about. The census is one of those, and it's our districts, it's our neighborhoods. So, you know, if you are interested in serving on a city board or commission, feel free to send me your resume so we can have it in the queue. I mean, Houston Library, the Ethics Board, Independent Review Board, right? We have the Zoo Board. We have all types of stuff in the city. You can see all of the boards, when they're due, when the term expires, because we have to be in other places of power. Oftentimes we just talk about those who are elected, and we don't even know that there's a full breadth of places that we could be making moves to break down some other things. So that's some stuff that's on the horizon. And so we have qualified people in our midst that we need to be able to appoint. And if you can allow us to use our position to do that, we can have change on multiple levels.
Thank you all for that. I appreciate those last comments. I know the time is far spent. So we're going to go ahead and wrap up. If I could get each panelist to just quickly give us some closing remarks. What are you working on? What are some things that we as a community can do, and just kind of give us any upcoming events that you have going on. And I will go ahead and start with Attorney Adjei.
Well, again, I want to say thank you so much for inviting me to be on the panel. And I think it's inspiring and it's refreshing just to listen to like the level of this conversation. Definitely been on a lot of panels, and sometimes the panels, you don't feel like you learn anything new, you don't feel like you're being inspired or encouraged, and I felt like all those things happened on this panel. So I think as an attorney, we're constantly seeing like really difficult and challenging situations and are being asked by our clients to solve really complicated problems. I'm active in both for Covenant House for young professionals and for HYLA. So for those who are on the line who are young attorneys, for Houston Young Lawyers Association, like we need you because of this moment. I think that we're in history. It's given us an opportunity to push some events that probably wouldn't happen. So for the Houston Young Lawyers Association, they're pushing forward for having and it'll be announced tomorrow, there's going to be a book club that's going to be going on. There's going to be a service event that's going to be being pushed. There's also going to be a panel that's going to be happening at the end of I believe the end of this month, where it's going to have Acevedo, who's going to be there, a former councilwoman, Amanda Edwards, and this is obviously an opportunity for people who've been either are in positions of power or who have been in positions of power. They can be challenged and pushed on some of the positions that they have, because we are trying to push the ball forward. We do also want to do a panel for Covenant House, because these are the people who Covenant House represents and are helping are some of the most fragile people in our society. They're homeless, and they're trying to get on their feet. And these are the people who are being affected and having direct contact with the police. And these are the people, because they're so vulnerable, are where the scary things can happen. And so if you are interested in those things, please feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to hear from you. We'd love to get your energy, your enthusiasm. I want to continue to keep the conversation going and the movement going as we continue to talk about these ideas and settle on the positions I think that we have, and encouraging our council members so that they can continue to, so we can continue to be partners with them as they continue to push it forward. So thank you again for having me on the panel, and that's it.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to move it over to Attorney Allen. Just tell us briefly what you have planned moving forward, where we can contact you, and what's coming up next.
So one of the things first, let me just say, really thank you for this opportunity to be part of this dialogue, this discussion. I met some awesome panelists today. I see some awesome folks and great conversations happening in the chat. I can't wait till we get like the little download of it so I can read everything, because I kept trying to scroll up and down once I shut my mouth to try to read all the wonderful feedback, hearing about some great work organizations are doing that we can naturally kind of correlate with. In terms of where, I've seen my part, I've been representing protesters free of charge, and I'm currently working on expunctions, but also trying to get other people, share information to get other people who I don't represent to get expunction help, and also trying to get other attorneys to coalesce around those kind of immediate needs. But also I'm a board member of the Houston Lawyers Association. As I mentioned, it's the Black Bar Association here in the Houston metro area. And so we are already talking about building coalitions with other organizations to try to come together and come up with a Houston/Texas specific plan of action so that we're ready for when the Texas legislature opens up. We've already be talking to legislators about bills that we want to go forward to help address these issues. We want to seize the moment. Abbott, at the funeral of Judge George Floyd, went on the news and said he wants to work with the families for reform. We're going to hold you to that, Abbott. We're going to hold our mayor accountable. We're going to hold all of those who are in public office accountable. We want to hold ourselves accountable. And one of the things I've been contemplating and talking to people about, and as we go out and build coalitions with those who are seated in certain positions, that we always remember that the power is within us. So that we are not giving away any power, not depending on some outside force to give us the liberation and the freedom that we seek. That power is rooted within us. And so we just have to contemplate what that looks like and how to best get there and continue to adjust when we meet certain blockades and obstacles. So in closing, I really just want everyone to remember that you are the ones you've been waiting on, and the urgency and the promise of now, the call of our generation in this moment to do what past generations have done, which is stand up, sacrifice, and hold the gap for the generations to come. So again, thank you. I'm so invigorated by this conversation. I'm so grateful to have met some of you for the first time, and I look forward and am committed to staying in touch with you to continue to do the good that we're all called to do. So thank you.
Thank you for that. I'm going to move forward to Ray. President Ray, if you can just tell us what the Urban League is doing and what the next steps are and any upcoming events you have.
Yes, ma'am. I wanted to echo the sentiments of my counterparts and thank you guys for putting this together. I learned a lot from my peers. Some of them I already knew, and some of them just seeing them for the first time tonight. In terms of what we're working on from a national perspective, we have a few pieces of legislation that we are working to get pushed as it relates to the HEROES Act, which is tied to another round of relief when you're talking about our communities that are suffering as a result of the pandemic and the high unemployment rates. Then we also have another piece of legislation as it relates to the Justice and Policing Act, which will provide some federal reform as it relates to some of the things we've been seeing across the country. We have action alerts tied to Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, as well as Breonna Taylor. And I wanted to definitely make sure that we uplift that because not enough people are talking about what has happened to Breonna Taylor as a result of her being killed due to a no-knock warrant, which is a part of that legislation that we are trying to get rid of. And I'm hearing a lot of conversation. I think it does need to be uplifted about making sure that we are protecting our Black women and making sure that we seek justice for her with just as much fervor, just as much perseverance and ambition as we're doing that for George Floyd and the others. And then you see time and time again, our Black women are leading and stepping up. Even tonight, you guys leading this panel, putting this together, Councilwoman Thomas, Attorney NECA, Attorney Stacy, all these amazing women. So we have to make sure that we bring her justice just like the others. But also from a local perspective, we are continuing to work on the census, on voter engagement, education, making sure that as many people complete that. The state of Texas did not fund at the state level. Our governor did not put any money towards getting an accurate count. And when you look at California comparatively, they literally put millions of dollars towards that. They intentionally opted to put no money whatsoever towards getting an accurate count in the state of Texas. So if you have not completed the census, please, please, please do that. You can also get engaged with us. We have a number of voter registration drives that we are organizing right now. And I want to leave people with a message of hope because I have had more people reach out to me than ever that want to get involved at every level. When you're talking about some of our brothers and sisters that are not typically engaged, I know someone referenced the elitism. That is definitely a real thing because the riots were not just about racism and the white establishment. There's also a message to us that are leaders in the Black community to not forget about the least and the last. We have to make sure that we bring them along as well. But looking at, how we're making change across the board. And so I would encourage people to reach out to me. I'm available on all social media platforms. I'll drop my email in there, but also people from corporations. I've had more corporations now that are trying to reform their culture, their policies, things that they should have been doing decades ago. They're now trying to make substantive change. And so we have to take advantage of this in this window to make change at every level, to continue to apply pressure. It's not going to happen overnight. We have to keep our foot on the pedal and make sure that we continue to push forward. So again, thank you.
Thank you for that. I'm going to move over to activist NECA. Just tell us some things that you're working on. Where can we find you, and what's coming up next?
Good evening. Thank you so much for having me here. It's an honor to be in Black spaces, particularly now in this time. I'm drawing a lot of joy and energy from you all on the call. I think for me, and I'll put my information in the chat. For me, I think I consider that there's a lot of work to be done externally, right? We can concede that point and have named the ways in which we can engage. I think for me, I would encourage that introspective and internal work, right? That there's research to be done and unlearning to be done and unpacking to be done about trauma that we've experienced as members of the diaspora. And so, yes, I do agree our work is external. And in fact, change often doesn't come unless we push the envelope. But I left a quote in the chat around one of my favorite poets, Claudia Rankine. She's an incredible Black woman, and in her poem Citizen and American Lyric, she writes that because white men can't police their imagination, Black men are dying. And it's this idea that we are not the ones responsible for that policing of imagination, for that heart work. You know what I mean? And that's not our role for another. It's our role for ourselves, right? And so we have to be responsible for our own healing, right? And seeking out how to do that. And I think in the same way that I'm very passionate about police abolition and recognize that that work can't be done without the recognition of other areas that must be impacted, it's also true that we cannot do abolition work without abolishing what we have learned, right, about this system that we move in, right? And we can learn from history on this, right? You have unimaginable amount of people put on ships, taken from the Gold Coast and elsewhere to many places, but our conversation today surrounds in the United States. And for generations, the reality, the system was a box. And it often looked like a field or some other degrading space, right? These concentration camps, these terroristic spaces, plantations and fields. They had to do some imagining beyond that when they couldn't recall what their freedom looked like. And I think that's our work even today. We have to imagine what is not in existence for us in order for us to get there. We have to build the road as we walk it. And I think that is not done solely that's not accomplished solely from external work. It has to be a responsibility that rests on your own shoulders. I have to read about how to do this work as much as I have to go out in the world and do it, right? And so I would leave you with that. You can, of course, reach out to me. The Houston Protesters Defense Team is an organization, as I stated before, that is working to represent protesters. We have a website, houstondefense.org. You can sign on to be a volunteer. You can sign on to be an attorney that represents people free of charge or for pro bono costs. You can upload media of police brutality that you've seen. There's a number of things you can do to get involved. But I would say that my commitment to this community is to provide trainings and teach-ins on that work that is extremely necessary, right? And I provide organizing workshops across the country, and will be willing to make those trainings available for folks on the call or anyone who would need them. So I would leave you with that in terms of a task that I could pledge to take on, and would leave you with an ask that you also take on that hard work. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to move over to Councilman Pollard. Just tell us what your office is working on. I know you mentioned a few things already in our discussion, and just tell us what's the next steps for your district and your committee as well.
Again, thank you for having me. And I want to say to all the panelists, I'm inspired by your words this evening, opened my eyes a lot about some of your perspective on how we should approach things from a city perspective. My highest priority right now is police reform and putting measures in place to really have meaningful and significant reform, because it's just, we're at a point in time where I think we can't let this period escape us without putting forth something significant and meaningful. We're still in the pandemic, regardless of what the media may have shifted away from. Remember that the virus is still alive in Southwest Houston, and especially in minority communities all over the city. We have really high percentage rates. So practice social distancing, wear your mask, Be mindful of the seniors and the elderly that you are around. It's serious, and we need to not forget about that, as well as the census, like others have said. If you want to explain the census to people who really don't understand, just say, hey, it's a head count. You know, if you're going to have a family reunion and you need to see how much food to prepare for, you're going to need a head count to see how much drinks to buy, how many plates to have, how much chicken to have, or whatever the case may be. And if you don't have the proper head count, you can't properly meet the needs of the people that will come. So if you only prepare for 10, because only 10 people signed up and RSVP'd and 50 showed up, now everyone's dividing that plate in small amounts, and it won't meet the needs of everyone. So be mindful of that. And my last comment is just for us to build each other up. None of us have all the right answers, but we all are trying to get to the same place, and that is betterment for our communities and our families, and justice and equality for all. And what does that look like? I don't know, but I know collectively we will get there much faster than if we are going back and forth with each other. And so we have to band together. We have to understand that if we don't understand something or a different counterpoint, to approach people and have an open mind and to listen to perspective and have open lines of communication, because you're going to see that you're going to learn a lot from people that you may not have even thought you would if you wouldn't have gave them the time of day. And so we need to really build each other up. We are the change that we want to see. Things like tonight bring us closer together and get us on the same page. But we need to have more of this, and we need to take this outside of just this town hall, and we need to take this to our group chats, and we need to take this to our brunches, and we need to take this to our churches. And the more that we come together as a community and remember that the unity in community, then I think we'll get to a better place. But it's going to take all of us working together collectively and building each other up for us to get there. And I look forward to working with all of you all to get to that space. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Councilman Pollard. And last but not least, I'll move over to Councilwoman Thomas to tell us what's going on in District F with the Housing Committee as well, and any upcoming bills, or not really bills, but legislation that you have coming forth as well.
Sure. So this was great. I echo the sentiments of the panelists. This was much needed. I've been in Zooms all day. And this was a good break, a good dialogue to be with some Black people. So I love Black people. So thank you for the invitation for that. And NECA, I'm on the work group for Center and Race at Prairie View that we're gonna have. So stand by, girl. Stand by. I'm writing that curriculum. So there's a few things that's happening with, that's coming up that you should be aware of. Yesterday, we had the Economic Development Council meeting, where we're going to stand up our $15 million small business relief fund due to COVID. So similar to what we did to the $15 million rental fund, the critique and feedback we received from that, we're looking at doing an RFP with the CDFI, and potentially with 2 agencies issue, and you have to be a small business with 15 employees or less. So real mom and pop. That presentation is on the website. It's on Facebook. You can see it. Now's the time, particularly the Black businesses in our district that they don't have access to the payroll protection funds. These funds will allow them to do that. And so we're working through that. So I want to keep that on your radar as you might be connected to small businesses that will need that help, that capital to stand back up during this time. My office is it's rather supporting. So a couple of weeks ago, we had a student-led Black Lives Matter march in A-Leaf that was student-led by the class of 2021 of ELSIC and Hastings. And so a follow-up to that is that they're going to have a youth-led conversation with HPD. They want to reimagine public engagement, because the reality is that they're not doing coffee with a cop. right? And so we are just there to hold the space for them. And so I would encourage, if you are available, to join on that call so we can hear what the young people have to say. Because what started as a post on Facebook ended up with 300 young people, and there was not an issue, and it was great, and they were empowered, and they had space to speak. So we're working with them to make sure that they are documented with that, and they get to move forward with their agenda. The housing meeting is on Monday morning at 10:30. I mentioned we're talking about the relief fund. So the top 10 zip codes that had the highest demand for that $15 million, majority of those zip codes came out of District F, 77036 being number one, which I share with Councilmember Pollard, 77042, 63, and 82 are the highest. And so that's telling us is that, so it's either two questions. So in my real life, faculty member at Prairie View. So it's like the research question is, so either migration of Black folks have moved, right? And so when we talk about investment in the city, why is it only 3rd Ward, 5th Ward, or Acres Homes, right? Because the data is showing that majority of the need of housing security went west, right? So when we look at city structures and investment, why are we not out here? That because those zip codes didn't show up in the demand, or the Black organizations and the Black renters and all of that, they didn't have access to it as easily as other populations. So that's some of the stuff, the data that we're going through on Monday. And the preliminary report is out, and we're going to go over the final details, but we're using that data as a framework for other things of how we investigate resources from the city. So if you have any questions about that, I put my information. You can email me. So there was a question about the funds. No, these are our grant funds. We're going to issue those out. We are working for the small business fund. We're working on multiple products. So we are looking at 2 loan products at a very low interest rate, but the $15 million is going to come from our Section 108 funds and our CARES dollars, the $404 million. So you won't have to repay that back. And so if you want to, share that presentation and PowerPoint with everyone because we got to make sure that Black folks are able, particularly our small businesses, are able to access that capital because we're going to be impacted the most in terms of the economy when it's time to bounce back. So always available for if you want to share information or you want information from my office, definitely reach out and we will be in touch.
Thank you. And I want to just say a big thank you to all of our panelists. I know that we are way over time, but I think it was well spent with the information, and a lot of you guys got your questions answered. If you guys have not already registered on the Eventbrite link, please do so that we can send out the follow-ups to this town hall and also each panelist contact info as well. Again, I say thank you all. And if you have more questions and want to discuss more, I ask that you guys continue to do that in your respective organizations. And the Houston African Alliance Network will continue with these dialogues as well. So again, I appreciate everybody that tuned in, that shared, that asked their questions, that gave their opinions. They were not unseen. And so I'm pushing back over to my co-moderator if she wants to say anything, Sierra.
Thank you all. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you as well, Edidiong, and all the participants. Just a reminder that to register at the Eventbrite link, so you can access the follow-up information. You can also scroll to the chat and see contacts of the panelists as well. And we will be posting on Instagram TV at the various organizations a part of the Alliance.
Should we send our information to you so you can send out, or is the chat okay?
The chat is okay, but you can directly send it to me as well.
Okay.
Panelists can identify their contacts. Tom's your mind, so.
Okay, yeah, I'll send it to you so they can have the complete, because I think, doesn't this delete once you close it or something like that?
We're recording it. This recording will be sent out as well and posted on Instagram TV. Yeah.
Remember, tomorrow is Juneteenth. I know this is a kickoff to Juneteenth, so we need to be loud and proud and put that history out there for everybody to know, all on your timelines and everything tomorrow, because I'm to the belief that needs to be a federal holiday. We need to make sure that everyone is aware of the importance of Juneteenth, and we need to be very proud of where we come from and let it be known, just like they do for St. Patrick's Day and Cinco de Mayo and all these other holidays. We need to be big when it comes to Juneteenth and make sure people know the importance of it. So thank you all.
Happy Juneteenth, everyone.
Happy Juneteenth.
Juneteenth, everybody. And with that said, we're gonna close it out. Bye, everybody.
Bye, Black people.
Peace.
Thank you.
Happy Juneteenth.
Yes.